This continues an interview with George Massey on April 11th, 2007 at the Center for the Study of War and Society at the University of Tennessee with Kurt Keeler and
Justin Mintz.
And you were saying, I sort of said you were a bit surprised that a lot of the Vanderbilt students didn't write very well.
Yeah, and that was but at the same time, I'm sure that's kind of carried over from all different areas. A lot of.
Well, I know we talked a little bit. Actually, we had jumped around in that interview. And we talked a little bit about Vanderbilt, but it's sort of worth reflecting again. I mean, you're sort of back on a college campus in the tail end of the Vietnam War era, and what were your reflections on that?
Well, when I first got to campus, of course, I was going to be there, quote, as a student, and I went into the ROTC department and said you need to check in with them so they know you're on campus and all this kind of stuff. At that point, the prior PMS had decreed to the cadre that they would not wear uniforms. Well, the new PMS came in, and Colonel McIntyre, who I eventually worked for as the PMS, and he said, he was a West Point graduate, and he says, we're going into the uniform. We're military, we're Army, we're on this campus, and we're going to wear the uniform. Now, as a student, there were a lot of, Vanderbilt at that point had a lot of students who were and I forget there was a particular branch of
Peabody.
Well, they had Peabody, but I'm talking about they had military students there who were in studies that were going to eventually they were going to be instructors at West Point.
Okay,
they were getting their advanced degree there at Vanderbilt. I can't remember the name of the program, but anyway,
the program still exists actually. Yeah, I know exactly which program.
Okay, so he said, I'm not going to require you guys to wear uniforms, but he said, all the present cadre are going to wear uniforms, and every chance, if there is a situation where we need to have you come in or whatever, participate in some of our, you're going to be in uniform. And I totally agreed with that. I said, hey, I'm proud of this uniform. I'll wear it anywhere I need to. One of the things we also did after I completed my degree, then I got into the ROTC department. And Dr. Borman, who was my advisor on my thesis, he was a Far East specialist, Asia, Japan, that area. And the fact that, I'd been in Vietnam, and he kind of helped me choose my subject, and I wrote about Vo-Yu-Minh Yap, the Vietnamese general. But anyway, one of the things he kind of recommended, we discussed it one day, and then it kind of came to fruition, is that, the ROTC department needs to become proactive and get out on campus and let people know what you're doing here. Because at this point, I don't know if you're a scholarship student or not, but at Vanderbilt, the scholarships program that we had, Army ROTC scholarship program, was the only way that program survived in the early 70s. I mean, had we not had those students, it would have been pretty meager. Because, it's a good school, worth a lot to get the ROTC scholarship. But one of the things we found out is that a lot of professors had no idea what this scholarship program involved or what it amounted to. So we literally, the ROTC cadre, divided up, and we took, say 20 professors, called them and says, hey, we'd like to come and have an in-office sit down with you and just explain our ROTC program. 99% were very receptive. And you had that 1 or 2%, I'm not real sure I want to hear this stuff. But in any event, they would sit and listen to it. But once you got into it and really, described what the ROTC program was, what the ROTC scholarship program was, what we were about, what we were trying to do, became like I say, a public relations thing, if nothing else. And we were, I think, considered. Now, the Navy ROTC was always strong. And I don't know, just for generally, I guess, from past times, it had always been a strong program there. The Army had always been kind of looked down upon, or not looked down upon, but had not had that same support, I guess you'd say, from the administration. But we also, fortunately, a Navy captain retired, and he was in the admissions office there at Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. And of course, he knew the scholarship programs, and he really started pumping that hard to all applicants and all people coming into, recruiting, if you will, students for for Vanderbilt, and he played up both the Army and the Navy ROTC
I'm curious,
scholarship program.
before you join the ROTC cadre there and work for them, while you're just still a graduate student, and you're in civilian clothes, it sounds like your professors knew you were a Vietnam veteran.
Oh yeah,
But how many of your fellow students, and how often did that come up?
Of course, right away, I'm older.
Yeah,
Most
I mean,
of
so
them.
that
Right away, we wonder who this guy is. And it just in the course of the conversation, they would say, well, what are you getting a degree? And I would explain the program to them. I'm here to get an advanced degree because I'm going to be, instructor or, teach over in the ROTC department, military history. And immediately, are you kidding me? They have those kind of programs? I said, oh yeah. And I said, it's in all the universities around that have ROTC programs, like at the University of Tennessee that I wanted to go to, but, I didn't tell them that. I said, yeah. And most of the students were just totally dumbfounded that the Army or the military would have those kinds of programs. And I think they were very receptive to it or thought that, well, that's pretty good. They were positive about it.
Well, the reason I partly ask is that, my student, I think you might remember meeting Mark Walton.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He actually went to some school campuses to look at the school newspaper. And, he went to Wisconsin and looked through the school newspaper, though. In the 70s, there were all these Vietnam veterans going, and he can't find anything in the school newspaper.
Oh, is that right?
I mean, he can't find that. I mean, they're there. I mean, they're there in numbers that were sort of surprised. Several hundred are going at a time. Yeah, compared to, say, the World War II, where it's very clear when these veterans are going through. So I partly asked because it seems like it's in some ways, a silent group that goes through. But
well, like I say, with the program they had there for the West Point eventual professors or instructors up there, there were a pretty good contingent of quote students there, and we, but my courses were all primarily political science or history. I took some political science courses, but also mainly history courses. And, most of the students were very, I didn't feel any bad feelings from them, I guess you would say, or anything. They figured out this guy, and being a little more mature, and I was very dedicated to sit on the front row and all these kind of, number one, I couldn't hear all that great, so I figured I better be in front again, and try to do all the things you're supposed to do. So I had good rapport, I think, with the students. And once they found out I wasn't a wild-eyed monger or something.
Is there any questions they asked you that you sort of remember? What were they curious about? I mean, one, they were surprised that the Army sort of sending you to graduate school, but did anyone ever ask you about Vietnam, or did you get?
Well, we would discuss it some, and they would want to know, some of the things. And I didn't get into some real, war story type thing. I never was into that kind of situation. But I tried to tell them kind of what we were doing. I was with the Special Forces, and we were out, working with people, and they seemed to be generally interested in what we were about, because a lot of them had never had any kind of connection with the military for the most part. And of course, some of them, oh yeah, my dad was in Korea maybe or something like that. So, but as far as a particular gut wrenching question, I don't know that.
Well, I give you a question every now and then. I mean, particularly when I go to high schools or tell high school teachers how you need to brief your students. Make sure your students particularly don't start out the first question, did you kill anyone? There's a range of questions. You might ask that as the 100th question, but you would never ask someone that as a first question.
Matter of fact, I was going to allude to that same thing. I've made some presentations. I've got a little slide program that I talk about the culture of Vietnam. I show how they dress and how they live, and, some of the things they grow, and nothing has to do with the military. It's just about the Vietnamese culture. Well, invariably there will be that question. Little Johnny, 10 years old, he'll say, "Did you ever kill anybody?" And like you say, the teachers will just go, "Oh my God," they just
I did.
And I just try to answer this. War is very difficult, and sometimes people do get killed, and most of the time the little kids, okay, they've seen enough war movies and stuff like that, so they know that happens. But that's an interesting comment. Yeah. you'll get that question, and it's out of a sincere.
No, I mean, I think some of the people ask you, I mean, I think don't have a consciousness that that's not the type of, that's not to start off a dialogue, conversation.
But the college students, we never.
You didn't have that. You didn't
no,
encounter
they
it.
did.
No, you didn't encounter it.
Not really.
Well, after finishing there, and I'm just curious on your thesis. I mean, you knew Vietnamese. Did you use Vietnamese sources?
No, there were not.
They weren't
that many available, I guess you would say, or I didn't range far enough away to get into some of if there were any Vietnamese tomes anywhere that I could have used. Pretty well stuck to the basic stuff. And Dr. Borman, he was, I'll not say lenient with me, but he gave me some pretty good latitude as to what I could end up using, I guess you'd say. And it was, I tried to, where I could, if there were some, first source type stuff, I tried to use them. But for the most part, it was, just kind of compilation of a chronological training of Jap and how he was influenced with Ho Chi Minh and all that kind of. And I did, of course, the war had not ended at this point when I finished it. And I think I can remember back, I basically said, it's the jury is still out. Is he going to be the winner or is he going to be the loser of this whole thing? And the National People's War, as they call it, is that going to be the winning side? And it ended up, I guess it was, in total.
After Vanderbilt, where did you go to next?
Command General Staff College.
Okay, and so and
called the best year of our lives, and it was a good year. And you had about, I guess, 1,200 contemporaries, and we were all different walks of life. We had all different branches there: Army, Navy, Air Force. Had foreign students, of course. My table mate, they broke us down into work groups and then into sections. Each work group had about 15, and then you had about 4 work groups, so you had a section of about 60 offshoots. And they planned this. They didn't put all infantry guys or all artillery guys. They had an artillery guy, an infantry guy, translate. They tried to break it out because you were trained to be general staff, so you'd have to work with all these kind of different branches, if you will. And they would infuse some of the foreign officers. Well, my table mate was from Tunisia, Azmi Majou, and he had been here in the States as a lieutenant, I guess, in the advanced course. So he was coming back for his second. Eventually, and unfortunately, I lost contact with him. And I'm not sure how far up in the Tunisian army he probably ended up, but I'm sure he
was on the track.
Yeah, he was on the track. And he spoke good English. And his wife, unfortunately, she spoke no English at all. And of course, with me being his table mate, then my wife had to, kind of help her out. Plus, she was pregnant while we were there in the course, and my wife would actually take her for medical, for the doctor's appointments and things like that. And she said, I would try to speak. Of course, she would just, nod her head and grin. And of course, Osme would brief her, Colonel or Major Massey's wife's going to pick you up and all this. And we included them we had work group parties, and we included them, and she would come and, she tried to socialize as best she could, but she had no English at all. And she picked, she was starting to pick up some of the basic phrases, but he spoke good English, so we got by there.
Well, I regret I couldn't go to there was a Society for Military History meeting in Manhattan, Kansas.
Oh.
But everything I've heard about that part of Kansas is you're sort of in the middle of nowhere. Is that a?
Well, one of the things they say is don't pick any hitchhikers up there because you've got
I remember you. Yeah.
They've got the federal pen, the 2 state pens, and you got the disciplinary barracks. The Army's pen, if you will, or penitentiary. So they say don't pick up any hitchhikers. But it's north of Kansas City by 20 or 30 miles or something. So you could get into Kansas City fairly easily. But yeah, it's out in the kind of set off out there by itself. But it was a very relaxed year. I mean, it was a pretty concentrated as far as your studies go, but they had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of activities, and the fact that we were all senior officers to a degree, majors, lieutenant colonels, and some colonels, some few captains who were on the promotion list of majors. So it was that level of
well, it is really it's one of the big stepping stones.
Oh, it is.
Where did you think your career at that point in time? Where did you think your career might go? Did you think you might make it? You obviously made it to colonel, but past, did you have any inkling you might have a chance to make a 1-star? That just you felt?
You have to make your own personal assessment of that, and at that point, you're there with your contemporaries. Well, I'm good as some of these guys are, But one of the things, and I say this again, and it happens in the military, it happens in any situation. You play the politics. Well, I didn't. And I mean, just saying it like it is. I mean, sure, I had some guys I probably could have tied my coattail to, but I really just never really cultivated those kind of relationships. Maybe I should have. You can look back on it. But at the same time, I felt like, full colonel was probably a real good possibility. Maybe general. But once, I got into to Germany, and I'll also make this comment, and I don't think I'm overstating this to a degree. I think at that point, the fact that I had an SF or Special Forces background was not a good thing.
You think that was one of that might have hindered the promotion to the full?
Now, that's not to say that a lot of my contemporaries who did have some SF background at home, and of course they were good guys anyway. And that's, I'm just looking at it from my perspective. I said, maybe that could have been a problem. Because I had some red lines in my OERs, as they say. Some lack of tact, these kinds of things. And that all goes into it. When you get to a certain point, they start looking for what they call discerners to say, well, does this guy go or whatever. Didn't get selected. I got selected for a standby for battalion command, and never did really get battalion command. And that is a big, that's a big stepping point.
That's when you had a sense.
Well, and also at this same point, I reached 21 years on active duty, and I made a very conscious decision, family-wise, that we were going to settle down and put the kids through college. And at this point, they were saying, yeah, we're going to send you to the Department of Army in Washington, D.C. to enhance your career. And I said, I've never been there. Don't want to go there. And I saluted and got out. And that's a conscious decision on my part. Now, you can look back on it and say, well, what if? You could say, well, yeah, what if I had gone there? I probably would have made at least full colonel and possibly, could have stepped on. But be real realistic about it. I wasn't walking on water. So I just made a conscious decision, got out.
No, I mean, I don't mean asking this question. I mean, Lieutenant Colonel is quite a. I mean,
that ain't.
Yeah, that's. Yeah, I mean, that's. But I just wondered, particularly in terms of my sense of what I know about the military, getting to command and general staff, that's a real.
That was a good one.
That's a real marker.
And of course, a lot of the guys that I went to command and general staff college with retired as lieutenant colonels. Not all of them made full, not all of them made general, and some who did, of course. Some of the contemporaries went right on up. But when you and again, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but when you look at some of the guys who really moved on up, you say, okay, he was this, he had this kind of mentor. And you can trace, you can see. And I never played that. I don't say game, but I never had that situation. I don't know that any of the guys I alluded to earlier on, the one guy that I probably could have tied into and maybe made more of it was General Lutz, who I'd worked for in Vietnam, and who, when I came back to Fort Bragg and then ran the Special Forces officer qualification course and the O&I course for NCOs, he was the commandant there. I worked for him. He was very professional. I was very professional, but I never did really for the want of a better term, use that position, if you will, of our familiarity to say, hey, can you
give that extra push?
Yeah, I never asked him for that. And I'm sure had he would have probably done. But I think it had to have come from me. He was not going to say, okay, I'm going to pull you up, send you off, this type of thing. But that's,
So after Command and General Staff, did you go to Germany?
Went to Germany, battalion XO, and an infantry battalion, mechanized infantry. And that was an interesting tour, to say the least.
Well, one of the things, not only had the Army changed, but Germany had changed. I mean, what was the difference between Germany sort of mid-70s versus Germany
back in the 60s?
Back in the early 60s.
Well, the early 60s, the German people, for the most part, were still very, I didn't feel any animosity, the older Germans especially. And the same thing held true in the 70s. The older German, we lived out on German economy for a while until we could get on quarters post. Lived with, quote, the Burgermeister, the mayor of this little village, Holzhausen. Couldn't have been treated better. I mean, they adopted our kids generally. Mark Oswald and Martina Markert, very fine couple. Farming community.
Which part of Germany were you?
This was in Schweinfurt.
Oh, okay.
Up close to the border with the 3rd Infantry Division up near Würzburg and up in that area. But like I say, they treated us really great. The younger Germans at this point, you could get a sense that they were not real keen on having the Americans there. More particularly when you went downtown, a lot of the, the bars and discos and this kind of stuff were not real keen on having the Americans in there. Unfortunately, a lot of it was because of the way the Americans acted. And so we had to do what we call it was called CRAC, I believe, Community Relations Activities Committee or something like that. We had to really get proactive and try to make sure that the German businessmen understood that, hey, we'll try to, control these young guys if we can. And then, if they have concerns, we'll make sure that you come to us with your concerns and we'll try to correct it, and work together on this. But it was, the younger folks seemed to be a little less, glad that we were there than the older Germans.
Well, also, I actually, my first trip to Germany was in '78 when you were,
right there in the middle of it.
One of the things that I get a sense is, and I only know when the dollar wasn't very good, to the German market. In the early '60s, the dollar,
4 to 1.
Yeah, it was 4 to 1. And
4 to 1.
And in '78, I just remember it wasn't that good. And it was declining.
Well, there was a double-edged sword there. My wife and I have talked about it. We first went into Germany. Mark was 4 to 1, 4 marks to the dollar. The prices, you could go out and eat on the German economy in a guest house for little of nothing. You could eat a tremendous meal for maybe $10. I don't know, maybe $2.50 or something, or $2.50. About 10 marks. So, that was good. You could buy stuff, and the ladies would go off on these shopping trips. And they would come back with all the crystal and, oh my God. But the one thing, my wife, some girls came by one and they said, yeah, we're going up to the Hummel factory, where they actually do the Hummels, the little collector dolls, Well, I think she had 20 mark, which was basically $5. And they brought back, I think, 4 Hummels for her, for a little of nothing. And those things today, she started collecting them at that point, and they're worth, a heck of a lot more than they cost back in the 60s. Now, when we got back there in the 70s, it was 2 to 1, or maybe 1 point something to 1, and the German prices had gone up corresponding. So the good deals were not as good as they were back in the early 60s. So that has been a big change. Of course, I wouldn't know. We left there in '79, I guess. So I'm sure it's totally changed now, even more. But yeah, that was you could travel around, and as a matter of fact, I was talking to a German couple about a week ago down at Myrtle Beach. They were here visiting, and I said, you sound like you have a German accent. He said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, I'm retired military, and I was stationed in Germany 2 or 3 times. And I said, one of the places was Bad Tolz. This guy was raised in Bad Tolz. So it's a small world, as you say. But it was interesting talking to them. And they said, well, when have you been back? I said, well, when have you last? I said, well, it was 79. They said, oh, yeah, things have really changed. But they were, it was interesting talking to them. Some of the things have changed. And of course, the military is really condensed down now. A lot of concerns have closed.
Well, I mean, it's sort of striking because, I mean, I just remember as a tourist and sort of visiting family, you know, in 78, you could just feel the American presence. I mean, I wasn't even looking for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we were,
you know,
we were everywhere.
The second time I was there in 88, I mean, not only you feel, I was in Karlsruhe, not only can you feel the American presence, but the French. There was an area where there were French troops, and now I think that's, you know, you really have to search it out now. I mean,
you know, the green tags are as the German or the American cars, you know, the green tags, they're not quite as noticeable. I guess they're still issuing green tags to American cars, you know, because I do remember that was one of the, even earlier on back in the 70s, they said, well, that's a security thing because they know exactly you're American because of the way your green license plate, you know. But I don't know if they've changed that. Maybe they have since then.
I mean, this was also a period of a lot of terrorism in Germany.
Yeah, see, it had started, and that was one of the things they were alluding to is the fact, and to give you a kind of another little digression, the high school there in Heidelberg, when I left Schweikert, we were down in Heidelberg at the USARA headquarters, they were getting these bomb threats called into the high school. And of course, they had to react to it. I mean, they had to, you know, hey, what's going on here? Well, they finally determined, we said, you know, we think these threats are coming from some of the students. So whoever thought this idea was very, you know, ingenious. The threat came in, the call came in, they shut the doors. And they said, okay, who's not here today? And they started going down and they compiled this list. It ended up, there were about 5 or 6 students who were playing hooky, and they would call these bomb threats. Well, the way they handled it is that those kids and their parents were sent home. I mean, they flat policed them up and sent them out of Germany. And of course, the sponsor, the daddy, he received a reprimand, and it went in his record because your dependents are, you know, your charge, if you will, while you're in Germany. So they stopped that by doing that technique. That stopped the bomb threats at that point. But yeah, that was the reason, because the terrorist thing was starting to build up even as early as 78.
I remember I landed in Germany, and I couldn't believe airport security in Munich. I mean, they had so many armed police and soldiers, and armored personnel carriers, and on the tarmacs. And,
yeah, it was starting at that point. Yeah.
You'd been in Germany. I mean, your first tour. I mean, you're sort of anticipating a potential Soviet attack. Those tours are how strong is that fear, and relative, say, 60s versus 70s? I mean,
well, the 60s, I was down in a little different level, if you will. When they'd call an alert, man, we'd all jump in our APCs and we'd go out to the LDAs, local deployment areas, and, you know, we'd sit there and wait and go through all the things you're supposed to go through, check, make sure you got everything, count all your ammunition. I mean, we had live ammunition a whole bit. Well, the second time, of course, I was Special Forces. Now, it was a little different drill there. You know, we'd get an alert, we dropped over somewhere, but it was, you know, it was all part of that. Third time around, being at a higher level, you say, well, yeah, there's a threat out there, but, you know, are they really going to come across the full gap, as we used to call it? But we would, you know, we'd have our alerts. When I was down in the battalion, we'd go out there, LDA, you know, deploy and set up, sit out there. And sometimes we'd go ahead and run a 2 or 3 day operation just to exercise the command and control and the tactical operations center and all this stuff. But then when I got up to USARA headquarters and I was in the G3 shop, the operational area, I got privy to go over and see and get briefings every day from the G2. And at that point, we had the satellites really starting to be used more and more. And at that point, I said, there's no way that they can mass and come across the border without us knowing. I mean, because these satellites could spot the license plate on a car.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to hire a million troops.
Yeah.
Even no matter how good you are.
No matter how good you are. And every time they moved out of the concern, we knew exactly where they were headed and what their, kind of the general direction they were taking. Of course, they were doing the same thing to us. So not that we were ever going to attack, but for them to be able to mass enough to come across, as we say, through the Fulda Gap, it just wasn't going to happen. Now, could they fire something way back and do that? Now, sure, that could happen. But as far as a attack across the border, and of course, we played the little games. We'd fly along the border with our choppers, and they would have their stuff up, and every now and then we'd have a chopper get a little inside of the zone, and there'd be a diplomatic call, and they'd go through those gyrations. But as far as so when I came away from Germany that last time, in my own mind, I said, it's not going to be a ground attack. But of course, we were arraigned there, and they knew it.
Well, because I just remember in the 80s, you'd often sometimes get these sort of, there's one book I even remember reading in college about sort of the next World War, and this sort of you wake up one day and the Soviets have come over the border, and
that couldn't happen. I didn't think.
Yeah, it sort of was striking. I remember going in '88 to Budapest, and then to another small city, and I saw a bunch of Soviet troops sort of, just walking around the town. And it was sort of shocking because I thought, I sort of still had this image of, that was often portrayed as these Soviets are really these really powerful troops that could.
Yeah.
I looked at these guys and said, this is what we're worried about. I mean, it really had this visceral.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was sort of funny to have that reaction, but I said, these are the guys that could
come across.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't think so.
And as you well know, then at that point, we knew the Soviet economy was really struggling, and they just didn't have the real staying power that they could have, really pushed across and done anything. We could have smacked them pretty hard.
Well, I mean, I ultimately asked because in your earlier tree, not only you mentioned your junior level, so you just take this literally, and you knew it this, but ultimately it's the Berlin Wall had just gone up in the
62 or 61. We were there in 60. I was there the first time in 63.
Yeah. So I mean, it's
short period. So you didn't know, but even and the other side of it is that last tour there, we were able to go into West Berlin and took the kids in. Of course, you had to travel by train at night, and they went through this gyration. You had to turn your IDs in because they didn't want any of you escaping or getting into East Germany. And it was kind of a funny game. And of course, kids thought it was a great adventure. But you had to travel at night, and you got into Potsdam in the morning, and you waited till they would let your train go on in there till they'd check to make sure everybody was on the train and hadn't jumped off, during the night. But what was funny, of course, they had the big wire fences on each side of the railroad, and they had guards about every 100, 150 yards or so. Well, when we stopped there, the kids got in the window of the train, and there was a guard right directly across from us, and they were waving, going on it. Of course, he was very stoic, wouldn't make any idea that they were there. But when the train started to move out, he kind of waved his hand like that. And you just sit there like, that guy understands what's going on here as much as we understood what was going on. But that was good. And the kids still remember that. They said, the guard waved that. But he didn't do it, he just kind of down below waved his hand like that. It was kind of interesting. But that was a good trip for the kids. And when you get into, the East or the West Berlin, and then you drive across. At that point, we still had checkpoint Charlie, I guess, had to go through, and you get into East Berlin, and you say, "My God, this is still." It was still bombed out in World War II. Of course, I had seen that in 63, 64, and 63 actually. Same thing. They had improved some, but it was still pretty meager over in East Berlin, even in the 70s.
Well, I mean, I remember in '88, there were not many, but there were one or two buildings on the one high part of Budapest that were still in ruins.
Oh, yeah.
And and it was in a high rent district, so it was even more, you could clearly tell that there were still some scars. After Germany, what happened next?
Came back to Fort Bragg, supposedly to be an instructor in the Foreign Area Officer program, which was at that point was part of the Special Forces program, in that you would become a area specialist for either Czechoslovakia or wherever part of the world you were going to be, assigned to, so to speak. And I was going to be an instructor in that particular institute. I forget what I guess it was a Foreign Area Officer Institute there at Fort Bragg. So I walk in and sign in, do the whole bit, and the guy that I was replacing, the guy I'd served with in Special Forces and had known him forever, Dallas Cox, he swapped, he had continuity files, and we kind of swapped notes and everything. And I said, well, we were going to go on leave back to Middle Tennessee and come back, get set up. And by this time he'd be leaving, we'd have another little overlap. So I go off on leave, come back into Fort Bragg, and so, Colonel Massey, you need to report down to, Colonel Milotowicz's office. I didn't know him from Adam. While I was gone, they had decided, hey, we need this guy over in the Special Forces School. I was not a happy camper. Was not a happy troop at all. And because I'd had my mindset that, hey, I'm going to go teach here and, kind of be a Tweety professor. No reflection. I just thought, this will be interesting, teach and do this stuff. And then the next thing I know, they said, no, you're going to go over to Special Forces school or part of it and run the officer qualification course and the O&I course for the senior NCO. And you're going to work for Colonel Ola Mize. Now, I kind of grin when I say that. Colonel Mize was a unique individual. Medal of Honor winner out of Korea. Good old country boy from Alabama. And rough as a cow. So I walk into his office, and he's sitting back, little bitty guy, little wiry, full of peat and vinegar. Now, Colonel Mize, we looked at your record, and we decided that, you ought to be over here in the school, blah, 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 blah. He started blowing smoke up my butt. And I'm standing in front of him. Of course, he's full blown Lieutenant Colonel. I said, well, sir, I want to tell you right up front. I said, this is not where I was assigned, and this is not what I want to be doing here. And I looked at him, and he said, well, my God, you're straightforward, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. I don't beat around the damn bush. I said, now I'll do the job if this is what you folks say I want to do. And at this time, the commandant was a different general. He wasn't General Lutz. And I, of course, didn't know he was coming to be the commandant. But anyhow, long story short, Colonel Mize said, yeah, we need you here, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, great. Where's my office? And we'll get to work here. So I, became the officer for the, they call it the Resistance Division, and ran the officer qualification course and the O&I course for senior NCOs. Had a real good warrant officer that ran the O&I course, so I just turned it over to him and said, Mr. Peach, you know what you're doing here. Continue on, and I'll just check on you if you need help. Let me know. The officer course was a different question. It had been a little rough. It had been a little rough around the edges. So we started tightening up some of the requirements. They were letting guys go through that aren't really good swimmers and this kind of stuff. And I said, no, we're going to tighten it up. And they need to be basically qualified before they get to the course. Because what a lot of guys were doing, they were volunteering to go to Special Forces thinking, this is great. And they weren't, physically ready for it. And some of their background wasn't really. So we really started screening them and started figuring them out before they got there. One of the first things we did when they came in there.
And this was 88?
This was 79.
79.
Just got back. We would put them out on a orienteering basis, really was a compass course. They had to go out by themselves. And we gave them a compass. So there's the point that you need to end up on, 24 hours. We set them out late in the evening. And away they went. Beating through the woods. And it was a test just to see how well they were. There was a little stress there. A lot of them didn't know the area, didn't know what they were getting into. And we found a lot of them the next morning about 300 yards in. That's as far as they got. And of course, they were immediately kicked out of the program. Then we put them through the swimming program. And they had to go through that thing. If it was a weak swimmer, sorry guys, you're not here. So, and then we went back to the unit and said, don't send us these guys that are not physically able to come here and do this thing. And then we started trying to tighten it up a little bit. And so I was there for 2 years, and General Lutz came in right after that, and we got along real well. He was very supportive of some of the things we were doing. Didn't have a real strong instructor group at that point. We started trying to get people in, recruit some guys in that could be good instructors.
Well, when you say they weren't good instructors, I mean,
well, they just weren't good on the platform.
So some of it was they just didn't know how to teach.
Yeah. And of course that was our problem as much as theirs.
Mm-hmm.
We had to run them through some murder boards and what we call murder boards and things like that. They had to get up and make their presentations to us, and if they didn't cut it, hey, you got to go back, tune this up a little bit. And so it was just a matter of tightening it up. And we had some good young captains that came in, and like I say, you improve the instructors and you also improve the students they're getting, and it started turning around a little bit. But it was a good tour. Stayed there 2 years, and then went off to ROTC duty second time, and went to a professor of military science assignment out in Cheney, Washington, Eastern Washington University. And that's where I ended up my career. And at that point, like I say, our daughters were starting to college. And that's when they contacted me and said, oh yeah, we're going to send you back to the Department of Army to,
So that's what, yes.
enhance your career. And I just said, thank you very much.
Of all the places, not so much the military duties you had, your official duty as an Army officer, but what's been your favorite place for you to live in the United States? Of all these, because you were in some very different areas.
We enjoyed Monterey. The 2 years there in the language school, that was an interesting area because there was a lot to see and do in California. You run up to San Francisco, run into Yosemite, or go down. Because we had a pretty long break at Christmas, and we had some time off. Got down to LA, but it was one of those things. I said, we enjoyed being assigned there, but I would never want to live in California, full time.
Yeah,
but it was an enjoyable area to be.
I've moved to California. I've only been there 3 times, and I have thought the last is I wouldn't mind living here for a year, but I wouldn't want to.
It would be tough, and then more particularly LA. We got down there and got 6 lanes of traffic like a NASCAR race. And this was back in the.
No, I know. No, I mean now.
Way back there. And I said, gracious.
I once went for an interview, and I remember I was on Eastern time, so I was getting up super early. But I remember I drove down to I went 2 hours by car. Yeah. And there was no traffic early in the morning, but I came back and there was all this traffic. And it was a Saturday. I said, the traffic's horrible. Said, that's nothing. You should see what it's like on Monday. And I couldn't believe it.
Well, that was one of the things we liked about Monterey. It was still at that point in the 60s pretty laid back. It was not real hustle bustle, and we didn't have very far to go.
You decided to return to Tennessee.
Came back to Tennessee. And went into stockbroker business with Dean Woodard there in Nashville, and found out pretty soon that was not my calling. Really, it was one of those things. I said I did not like to take Justin's money, put it in something, and not be able to guarantee it to him unless it was a mutual fund. And those usually don't get you in too much trouble, but to put it into a stock and it tubes and I've lost all your money. That was a hard thing for me to get my.
I mean, ethically,
Ethically, it was not something. Now there were guys there and they were good at it. I mean, they could take your money and talk you into buying XYZ stock and never look back. And some people can do that. Now there were others who were very good. I mean, they were financial planners and they really tried to do the program as it should be done. I mean, it was good training, and at that point, Dean Woodard really put us through a good training program. And some of the folks who had been in it or who went through it like I did, we took a 6-hour exam. And some who had already gone through the bar, they said it was very similar to taking a bar exam. I mean, it was a rigorous exam. I fortunately got through it. But then just was not my cup of tea. So I got out of it and started doing some other things. Eventually ended up back in our hometown as a banker. And you think, he's a banker. He's going to loan people money now. But it was, as it ended up, there's two guys I'd gone to high school with, had a little family bank, and they'd call me, think about coming back there and becoming a banker. And I said, I don't know anything about banking. I'm an infantry officer. Well, you don't have to know anything about banking. Yeah, it's okay. And ended up, went back there, and it was a bank that was in trouble. I found out after I got there. But again, it was a lot of fun. They gave me the small business administration portfolio they had. They had a good number of these SBA loans on the books.
And this is your hometown.
It's my hometown. And they said, oh, yeah, name recognition, and, you're a local boy and a hero. And I was, well, I'm not a hero, but, local boy. And it was interesting to go back. And that was when my wife and I both said, if we stayed there, the old saying, it's hard to go back home. It was hard to go back home. I mean, our family was still there. My dad had passed away. My mother was still there, and her folks were still there. And all these people that we had, quote, grown up with, a lot of them were still there. But when we came back in, having been away for essentially about 30 years, it was, we were accepted, but then again, it was just a different atmosphere. And I don't know how to explain it other than that I think we had grown, for the want of a better term. And a lot of guys were still the same old guys, and we got along, but still there was just something that was not.
Well, one of the things, and I think it's highlight. I mean, it's something I noticed with World War II veterans, but also with career people is, you've really seen the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've been to Vietnam twice, you've been to Germany, you've been all over the United States, and you've also had contact with, many of these courses. And I get a sense in small town Tennessee, a big trip is Nashville. Or
Las Vegas, start doing Florida for vacation.
Not to pick on Cindy, but once I was shocked when she said, I've never been to Memphis. And I thought, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? So was that some of it that you had really...
I think so. That's why I say we both have, we've been out and done a lot of things. These folks have never, and you try to talk to them, and they were interested in where we'd been, but they couldn't relate to it. Mm-hmm. A lot of them couldn't. And these were guys that we'd grown up with.
How would the town change? Having this sort of 30-year gap, or had it not changed very much?
It had not changed. People had gotten older. That'd be one of the things I'd say to the folks that I remembered as a kid, that were the businessmen. They were now the old businessmen. But overall, the town had not grown that much.
Yeah.
It's still pretty well.
Portfolio. Any surprises there about how the town operated?
Well, a lot of these loans were not local. The bank so we're 30 miles from Huntsville, Alabama, and at that point there was a lot of industry, and still is, of course, for the space industry. A lot of these loans were tied into the government type business, if you will. There were some others that were, basic stuff. The surprise was these small business administration loans. Of course, they get people to start their business or they help them get started, but they take everything to include their firstborn as collateral. And unfortunately, when these things didn't work out right, you had to go in and be the bad guy and say, guess what? We may have to sell your house. We may have. What I ended up trying to do, what I was able to do somewhat successfully, although the examiners would just keep pounding us, was, like I say, the bank was undercapitalized and we were in trouble. Eventually got bought out by a bigger holding company, and that made things a little easier. And they wanted to clean up these bad loans. And the Small Business Administration office up in Nashville, they were interested in, are they going to be able to pay these things back, or are we going to have to do the foreclosure type deal? We had to do that in one or two cases, and that was not any fun. That was not the fun part of it. But what we were able to do is get with these folks and do a workout type situation, reduce their payments, get them a little better organized, if you will, and work with them that way. And when I left there, then, most of these loans had kind of turned themselves around with one or two exceptions. We just had to, like I say, we had to go in and call the note, as they say. But one of the things I did learn from that is that the bank business is a basic principle is that do you have the collateral and do you have the ability to repay? That's the bottom line. And if you made a loan with somebody, that's what you had to figure out. The good old boy loans, the Jake Butcher loans, this town wide apart, you couldn't do that anymore. And the examiners, if you had any inkling, if they caught any inkling that this was someone that you grew up with, that you knew, the good old boy, they would just come down on it. And, having been gone, there's a lot of these folks that I knew that, you knew them way back when, but now are they good businessmen today? Some of them weren't. And you really had to work with them. Now, the two brothers that owned the bank, they had inherited, of course, and they had done a lot of these good old boy loans. Because, man, I grew up with a daddy. I grew up with them. I know who they are and all that, their families.
So the bank, this really was a problem.
It was, and a small town bank like that, for sure. When this holding company out of Kentucky bought the bank, they came in with a pretty heavy hand and said, hey, there's a new sheriff in town, and this is where we're going to run. And they cleaned up a lot of the loans. And of course, they had the capital that they could, operate. And if they had to mark off some loans or had to just absorb them, they could do it. But the brothers couldn't. One of them, who was a lawyer, he went back in the lawyer business, of course. The other one got out of the banking business, and that's what happened. And like I say, I tell a lot of people, I said it was great, it was fun, but it wasn't great fun being in banking. And that's when we came to Knoxville. So that, it was a tough time.
When did you return to Knoxville?
We came up here in '93.
Okay, so you were in your old hotel. You were back.
Well, yeah,
for about a little over a decade.
Yeah, back in Knoxville. Yeah,
or in your old hometown.
Hometown. Let's see. I went back there in '86. I guess. We were back there 6 or 7
years. 7 years. Yeah. And you became a plant manager.
Yeah, up here in Knoxville. Yeah. Just kind of a network thing, and met some folks, and they said, "Yeah, we need a guy out here to run a plant, plastics plant." I said, "You don't know anything about plastics, but you don't need to. We just need someone to order." And again, it was one of these things. It's like going into a unit that's kind of down and in a disarrayed state. First thing you do, you go and clean it up. Let's clean this place up. Get everybody, looking good. And then you go from there and try to organize and get people moving in the right direction, get them positive. So this particular outfit, I won't mention names, but they had a plant manager who was screaming and shouting, and everybody's a low down SOB, doesn't know how to do anything. And the morale was just lower than a whale's belly. So you had to I had to overcome that.
But it's interesting you say that because I think some image of the military, how it operates, is a lot of screaming and shouting, which in fact it's really not. I mean,
you'll get short-term results, but long-term you're going to ruin the unit, and that's what had happened here. Yeah. And the folks, the guys who were quote in charge per se, they were out, getting the business, getting the customers. And they had this guy back here running it, and he had running it from the ground. They kind of had let him, but and that's why they said, hey, we need somebody to come in and kind of, be sane about running this place. And I hope that was. I think it was. Turned around pretty good.
And when did I remember we tried to call you for a follow-up interview, and you were literally ready to pack up, and it was like there was no time. What year did you decide to move to Carolina?
Well, we went down there the summer of 2003 and bought a second home down there. We were still at the condo up here, Cherokee Bluff, at that point. And we had envisioned, we said, yeah, we're going back and forth. We'll stay down there a while. We'll stay up there a while. Well, we did that for about a year. Finally, about 2004, we said, hey, let's go to the beach full time. It was a lot more fun down there. And Justin knows where I'm talking about down there. It was a lot of things to do down there. And of course, I, retired. And so we went off down there. And then finally we said, let's just do full time down here. Because we were going back and forth. And finally in 2004, we moved full time. Put the condo up for sale, and it took a while to get rid of it. But that's what we ended up doing. But as I tell folks, then I got down there, and there's 100 golf courses or more, although some of them got shut down here recently. But one of the things you do is get a little job on a golf course, and you get free golf. So I put in an application to 3 places, and I got called, and this guy said, yeah, come over and be a ranger, player assistant or whatever you call it, ranger marshals. I said, yeah, that sounds like a neat little thing to do. You ride around, make sure people keep up, and all this kind of stuff. Well, little did I know, this particular course was tied into an umbrella of 6 courses. So I have access to 6 different courses. And, if you get on the course during the low season, it's free golf. So that makes it pretty nice. So as I say, I work for free golf. We get a little minimum wage type thing. I work my way up though. I'm up to the bag drop. We have the bag drop. I don't know if you're familiar with golf or not, but the people come in, you unload their bags, and then you load them on carts and send them on their way. And it becomes surprisingly, it's a tip type situation where guys will pump $1 or $2 extra for unload. I mean, here I'm working, slave labor here, so to speak. But it's kind of an interesting, and you meet a lot of different people.
I mean, do they have any suspicion of what your career was like?
Oh yeah.
So
a lot of them do. And a lot of them were prior military, but they were the grunt level, and hey, you're a colonel. And I said, hey, I'm just a good old guy. Don't worry about it. But we talked about it a little bit, and I talked about it. I asked them, what did you do? It's kind of interesting to get the different view of it.
I'm curious. The free golf. I don't play golf, but I can definitely see for those who play golf. I get a sense of it. Yeah. But you have a hard time not working. It almost is that also part of why you're doing this?
Yeah, I couldn't sit around at the house all day long, and neither could my wife. As a matter of fact, she had been a territorial assistant for Hallmark up here in Knoxville, had all of East Tennessee, ride these stores. Retail merchandising is an interesting thing. I never had. And she hadn't been involved in it either. She got in. So she rides a circuit and makes sure the girls are putting up the cars correctly for Kroger's and all these different grocery stores. That's not done by the grocery store itself. These retail merchandising doing. So we get down there and we walk into a Kroger. She said, I wonder who she knows where to go. And she flipped this book open. She said, because she can't sit at home. She's got too much energy. She said, well, maybe they need some RNs down there. She calls this lady. She says, you are a godsend. We're needing a TA, which is a territorial assistant, which is, kind of rides her on these RNs. But she now has from Camp Lejeune down to Georgetown on the East Coast. So, it has become a tar baby. But, again, it keeps us both kind of busy. And keeps us out of the house. And it's, get up and have a reason to get up. Because as I tell people, every day is a Saturday or a Sunday once you retire. And the only way you can tell the difference, the paper's thicker on Sunday. So you got to get up and be doing something.
Have you joined any veterans organization?
This is interesting. And I did join the VFW. Had never joined prior to this.
This is down
in Carolinas. And prior to that, and I don't know. I guess it's just kind of my view or background. I didn't need to have a place to go and sit and drink and tell war stories. That's never been mine. I've just never. I'll join the VFW because I run into some guys and say, "Oh yeah," and they had a nice little clubhouse, I guess you'd call it, whatever. And looking in the papers, I see they did some things. They were always supporting this, that, and the other. This would give me something to do. Well, I joined, and I was had to be very honest. It was not a good experience. Number one, and this is a personal thing of mine, you go into the bar, nice little bar in there, but totally full of smoke. Just kill me. And I said, I'm not going to go in here and sit, have a drink and just be inundated with the smoke. And then it was just an atmosphere that I really didn't get into. So I let my dues go this year.
What else about is it too many war stories or I just,
Yeah, it was just kind of an atmosphere that I just didn't feel comfortable in. And I don't know if it was, I maybe didn't give it a chance.
Yeah.
But the initial, feeling when I walk into this place and it's, they had their meeting. I went to a meeting or two and it was, it was run okay, but you're sitting there thinking, it was just, I don't know. Just wasn't my cup of tea.
Well, it's interesting because most veterans never join a veterans organization, so that's why I'm it's sort of.
Well, one of the things that, of course, they are saying, that you need to get the younger guys in because a lot of these guys they're older, and hey, I respect them because they've done their time, done their duty. And I say this, and it's not as a how do I want to put it, not a class thing, if you will, or a caste system or whatever. But it seems the majority are prior enlisted. Now, with that said, that doesn't say that I'm better than they are, and I should be due, deference because, quote, I'm an officer. But it just seemed like that was the culture. That was the culture of it, and that's okay. I'm sure there were some officers there, but it seemed like the majority of this particular group. And I'll have to say this also. This again will kind of mark me as far as where I came. There's a guy who wrote a book by the name of Massey, as a matter of fact. What you are is where you were when. That was the title of his book. He's a professor out in Texas, the name of Massey. But in any event, I'm raised in the South. I'd say 99% of these guys were New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania guys. And it's a
it's a very different culture.
It's a different culture.
Yeah. Oh, no. Well, particularly if that Europe, if they're Korean.
Yeah.
Some World War II in Vietnam.
And of course, you talk to some of these other guys, the neighborhood bar is a thing for them.
Yeah.
And down south, it's not that, it's not anything that I grew up in. And so for them to have a place to go to and they sit around and talk and smoke and joke and go on, that was all part of their nature. Well, that's just not me. I've never been a bar hound, I guess you'd say, or whatever. And again, that's no reflection on them. I'm sure there's some nice guys. Some that I met were great. But anyhow, as far as joining, I'm not much of a joiner, I guess you'd say.
Well, I know you. I know firsthand because you came to celebrate freedom, which was several years ago. So you've talked quite a bit about Vietnam, and you've written a memoir. Have you been back to Vietnam?
No, I have not. It's interesting. Older brother of mine who did his time, if you will, in the National Guard, Air Force National Guard, not active duty. He has taken a trip back to Vietnam. Of course, he likes to travel, and he brought some pictures back. And we hadn't really sat down and discussed it in full, but he went to all the different tourist places that they had set up over there. It's kind of interesting. They take them through a punji pit, and they take them down into the tunnels that they had and show how the tunnel rats operated and all that stuff. And he asked me my opinion on that. I said, those guys were crazy. I said, number one, we ran into tunnel complexes, and I said, I just backed off and blew them up. I said, as far as I'm concerned, that was a bunker or that was a safe haven for them. And I said, hey, we blew them up. I said, I wasn't going to send anybody down. I wasn't going to go down. If I wasn't going to go down, I wasn't going to send anybody. So we just used our C4 and rigged them up and blew them up.
Because other units,
they had these guys that take a 45 and a bayonet and go off down there and look what they could find. Hey, I just said, hey, if there's weapons and caches of ammo down there, hey, we'll blow it up in place. And then if they want to dig it out, that's something they can do later on their own time. So that's my approach to the tunnels. Although we didn't run into that many down the area we were north of us, that they had more of them. But we ran into a few. We just blew them up.
Any curiosity to go back? Or
it'd be interesting to go back and I think they have developed the roads a little better, because back then, about the only place to get around, the only way to get around was a helicopter. When we were there were some roads around the cities. It'd be interesting, I guess, to fly out over the areas where we were just to see how things have changed. It would be interesting to go up into the Central Highlands where the Montagnards were to see if their plight has changed any. I've got a suspicion that they're probably still tending their little rice patches and growing their little Vietnamese pigs and living pretty simple life. I don't know that they probably improved that much. Maybe they have.
Did you ever, back in the States, in any of the officers you served with, did any of the South Vietnamese officers make it back to the States that you know of? Because you mentioned this one officer who was quite professional.
Tio Bao. I have 2 letters. We corresponded and then I lost contact. And I've got an idea. He was, there was a pretty high price on his head. And I would say he probably got police death.
He didn't make it out.
Didn't make it out. Now, I heard that one of the interpreters we had made it out. But I don't know that for a fact. But as far as any of the other folks that I work with, I don't know that any of them.
There's been no reunion that you've run into someone back in the States.
No. Earlier on, I mentioned this lieutenant I had as a company commander, Lieutenant Savaggio. Very intense individual, to say the least. He became the chief interpreter for the ambassador to Vietnam. He literally, he got over there and just immersed himself in the culture and the language and everything else. He was at Leavenworth. When I went to Leavenworth, he was there as an instructor. And he had married a Vietnamese girl and had brought her whole family back. As, once they could get them out. But he was a unique individual in that he was just so intense. And like I say, he became the chief interpreter for the ambassador of Vietnam. And then, of course, once it kind of fell and he came back and got back into the Army.
Was he there in 75 when it fell?
I think so, yeah. I hadn't talked to him direct, but yeah.
That was the sense you got that he...
Yeah. And then, of course, he got out and got his family out. And then he was at Leavenworth, and I'm not sure where he is now. He left Leavenworth. I lost track of him. But he was an interesting individual. He was a guy, we were in Ranger School together. Even though he was a company commander and he had left, and then I went to Ranger School and he came up. He was in Ranger School at the same time. He's first lieutenant, I was second lieutenant. He could never learn how to tie the knots for all the rope bridges and all this stuff. And he would come and wake me up. Sleep is a premium in Ranger School. You get 2 hours at one time, that's a lot. And he was so intense that he would come and wake me up. And we would go in on the train, and I'd try to teach him how to tie these knots. He just wanted to learn it. So, and I'd try to work with him, and he'd get them tied pretty good. And then the next day, he'd get out there. But
he just never could.
He was not, but other than that, he was a brilliant individual. He really was. But I just thought it was one of those things that was kind of funny. And we've laughed about it since then when I saw him. I said, hey, did you ever learn how to turn it? He said, I've never learned how to tie those knots. He got through the course okay. Yeah. But that was not one of the that wouldn't fail you, but if you ever had to use them other than that, he was probably not.
People you served with, I mean, how many people have you stayed in touch with? And,
That's interesting. Not that many. I mean, you would think that, you'd have this. Some of the folks that we've stayed in touch with, for the most part, were our Leavenworth guys.
That was a very tight group.
That was a tight group, and that's during that time frame. Now, with the advent of emails and all this, it's starting to, you'll reach one guy and he'll say, yeah, I know so-and-so. As a matter of fact, just recently, there's a guy that had been a lieutenant when we were at Fort Benning together. He sent me an email and said, hey, do you remember me? And, we were together and this kind of stuff. Or we were in the same unit. We weren't that close. I kind of, generally remember it. But as far as, like for instance, the black lieutenant I talked about, Lieutenant Randall, Marshall Randall. I've done the Google, I've done everything because we'd like to get back in touch with him because he went one way and I went one way. We never were together. Never been able to get back with him. And I think it'd be interesting to see where he turned out, if you will, where he turned out. The guy down Mississippi, we correspond every now and then. We'll go by and visit because we were lieutenants together. And there's my JAG officer, my lawyer, as I call him, that lives above us there on Holden Beach. They moved back there. But there's just not that many that we've maintained contact with.
I mean,
Christmas card, we do the Christmas card thing a lot.
Well, I think the old army, the interwar army, where people stayed on post forever.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was where you're in the army, it's constantly moving.
Yeah, we were moving. One of the things, just to give you an idea, my wife made a This Is Your Life photo album for our girls. And our oldest daughter, when she started going through it, she started putting down addresses based on when you were 2 years old, 3 years old, whatever. And she presented these to them on their 18th birthday. We kept a lot of pictures, took a lot of pictures of them. And, it's a real keepsake for them now. But when we got through with that, up to her 18th birthday, I said, my God, she has had 18 different addresses. Now, some of those were short, we'd be here at this address for a school or something, or we'd move across posts or, that. Yeah. But 18 different addresses in 18 years. Now, that's pretty significant. And, it's just one of those little things that kind of jumped out at us. Started doing that for her. And our middle daughter, she was pretty close to that. She had about as many. Our son came along a little later and he didn't have quite that much moving around.
And your son went into ROTC.
He went into ROTC, and my oldest daughter had an ROTC scholarship and came to UT. And after about maybe the first year of it, she came home and says, this is not for me. And I said, hey, better you make that decision now. And she was all concerned that I'd be upset. And I said, hey, it's your decision. It's not mine. And I said, I'll support you whichever way you want to go. So we had to come and go before board. She just don't just walk away from an ROTC scholarship. And they did release her from the overall program, but there was a payback situation. I had to pay back, which it was part of it. I knew that. And our son, he bounded along, and then I'll tell one story on him. You'll appreciate this, Justin. He was after he got into ROTC. When we were at Bragg, when I was there running the Special Forces School, I would take him with me at night a lot of times. And I'd say, you stay right on my right hip. Don't you get lost. And I'd put him totally against all rules and regulations. If the chopper had ever gone down or the Jeep had ever wrecked, I'd have been in deep trouble, as they say. But, I'd fly him out on choppers at night and we'd go in and inspect stuff. And he'd stay right with me. This was a big adventure for him because he was probably, he was in grade school. This is just a kid. Well, when he was in the ROTC program over here, he had a transportation major who was teaching a tactics class, patrolling. And he was coming off with some stuff. And my son tells me the story, so I'm sure it's probably true. It was a major, he said something about, this, that, and that, blah, 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 blah. And do you know what this is all about? Blah, blah, blah. And my son was, sir, I've probably been on more patrols than you have. not the correct, not the most, correct thing to say to your instructor. And of course, he got chewed real hard after the class. And Major told him, I'll see you at the class cadet. And I said, you told me. He said, I've probably been on more patrol than you have, sir. Said, oh, man, don't be telling the kids. But anyhow, that's kind of some of the background there, but kind of interesting.
I mean, it sounds, did your son,
Well, he got in ROTC, went through the advanced course, and this was in the early 90s, and Justin will understand this, when they started doing the assessments at that point, the Army was drawing down, and he didn't get active duty. Crushed him. He got armor branch, and he was really, I said, well, let me see what I'll see what I can find out. So I still had some friends at the DA level. And in particular, had a guy who was a liaison from the senator's office to the military or vice versa. But in any event, I called him, and so he checked into it. He said, well, let me tell you, it's a numbers game. And it is a numbers game, as you well know. When I went on, everybody got active duty.
Now, everyone gets active duty.
Now. That's what Justin was saying. Well, there's all these years, Well, back then, they were drawing down, and they assessed, or they looked at 60. The numbers are kind of 6,600 records on each one. You slice off the top for the West Point guys and the DNGs and the scholarship guys, they're going to get active duty. And they only took in 2,200. So you took the top third out of this 6,600. Well, my son was down in the last 2/3. I don't know where he was in that schedule or in that area, but he wasn't up on the top, and he didn't get active duty. It's that simple. And the guy told me, he said, hey, it's a numbers game. And this General Lutz that I alluded to, his son was in ROTC. And I called him about it. I said, and he said, hey, unfortunately, his son had been killed in a car wreck. And he made the comment to me, I don't know if he was just trying, he said, hey, he said, JoJo, he called his son JoJo, we knew him. So our sons were contemporaries, if you will. He said, I'm not sure JoJo would have made it. He said, because it's a real numbers game. He said, I can tell you that, because he was not on active duty, but he was still involved in the military as a consultant. And he just said that. He said, it becomes a numbers game at this point. Now, today, sure, they're needing everybody.
It's interesting you tell that story, because I think someone reading this interview wouldn't have the sense that in the 90s, early 90s, the Army shrank. With good reason, but.
Yeah, we don't have a real threat now, and they're cutting back, and they program this out. They say, we'll assess X number, and that'll fill up these slots, and down the road, we'll have enough folks in here to man the force structure. Well, now, they need everybody they can get.
Nowadays, is if you don't sign a guaranteed reserve forces duty contract, you're going active duty, whether you want to or not.
Okay. And like I say, during my day and time, it was basically, hey, you want active duty and you want infantry branch, sign up, and away you go, because they needed everybody to fill the structure.
You alluded to this in the beginning, but I think this might be the point of the interview. As someone who was in special forces, you could not help but think a little bit about Afghanistan and Iraq. And what's your sort of thoughts, sort of now out of the military now for a number of years, but it's.
As I also alluded to the fact that I believe in going balls out. We went in, I think, with all the right intentions and all the correct intentions, more particularly in Afghanistan. That's a tough area. We didn't have the folks in place. Human intelligence had been cut out for the military. That's one of the big mistakes we made in our general defense structure. You got to have people on the ground that are native. Mm-hmm. We had that back in my day. We don't have it now. I don't know if they're trying to build it up, but it's a long process. We didn't have the language capability. I'm sure there were folks that were taking Farsi and Urdu and whatever else they're taking over now. But I'm sure there's a bunch more taking it now than were, 4 or 5 years ago. And we didn't have the linguists. So there were some things working against us at that point. And they didn't have an end plan when they went into Iraq. And I said this earlier on too. I said, based on talking to a good friend of mine, you've probably seen his name, General McCaffrey.
McCaffrey. Yeah.
He's up there a lot. He was a division commander during the the first Desert Storm, the 24th Infantry Division made the big development around the flanks there. And I talked to him about it. He said, oh man, he said, I was sitting back in the top and I was getting these reports of X number of enemy KI, CI, and it was just tremendous numbers, friendly, no WIA, no KI. And he said, this can't be right. Somebody's blowing smoke at me. Because he said, we had already programmed, we'd have X number of casualties, and they had figured out that we're going to have X number of KIs, X number of WIAs and all this. So he said, man, I jumped in the chopper and fly up there, and he said, sure enough. But man, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And he said, these guys were coming out of their holes with their hands up. So he said, at that point, we should have taken a left turn and gone to Baghdad. And so we were told to hold in place once we liberated Kuwait. Of course, at that point, if I understand it, I don't know all the history of the background. It was a UN mandate. They get them out of Kuwait and then hold. That's our mission, and that's what we did. Well, with that said, we do it again. We go back in there. We go into Baghdad. We roar into Baghdad, kick everybody out, and then at that point, we look around. And what the hell we do now? It's like a dog that catches a car. What are you going to do with it now? And we didn't have a plan. I mean, that's been my feel of it. There's a lot of things I'm sure I don't know about it. But at some point, and I'll say this, early on, there's one individual, and I believe in assassination. I don't know if this is going to...
No.
3,000 people were assassinated on 9/11 in New York, as far as I'm concerned. That's my take on it. Earlier on, we had a non-assassination policy that was developed. Your special ops guys can do that and do it very effectively. The Mossad in Israel can do it very effectively. And I think it can be effective. Now, a lot of people say, oh, we start assassinations, that opens up a real can of worms. They're going to do the same thing. They're doing it anyway. I mean, we might as well beat them to the damn punch, as far as I'm concerned. Now, with that said, earlier on, there's one or two of the clerics that I think we should have taken out. In particular, Al-Sadr. He should have been taken out. 3 years later, 4 years later, what are we having to live with? We're having to live with this guy who is stirring and fomenting revolution. And now, whether or not killing him or taking him out somehow would have precluded this from happening, you don't know. But I think it would have gone a long way, because that militia, I think, would have maybe disbanded. Because a lot of them were, part of the old strong military structure. I mean, hindsight's 20/20. Yeah, we should have kept some of the military structure in place that, Saddam ran, because, he ran that thing out of total fear. And those people, I think their allegiances could have been, redirected. But that's hindsight of what went on. But overall, I still believe in brute force in a lot of cases. And we're very conscious of the collateral damage. We're very conscious of the civilian populace, which we should be. But at the same time, there's sometimes that you just have to go balls out. And we haven't done that, so we're kind of paying the price for it now. Now, I haven't been on the ground, and you're not going to get, and I'll say this, I don't think we're getting a real true picture of what's going on over there through our media.
Well, the one thing, though, what was striking about the war is just how dangerous Iraq is.
Oh,
only seems, at least for Americans, seemingly takes it as a green zone.
Oh, yeah.
And I just sort of compared it to Vietnam, where Vietnam, there were actually secure areas.
Yeah, we had secure areas, and we didn't have, the religious, there were religious factions in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But they weren't as fanatical as this bunch over here is, and all in the name of religion. And it's tough. I've sat here myself trying to figure out, of course, I hadn't been on the ground, and these IEDs and all this stuff. You say, man, there ought to be a way to counter these things. I know we're trying to develop all kinds of techniques to signal, pick them up and all this stuff. And it just seems like, with free will, they put these things out. Now, whether or not we're setting patterns, that was one of the things in Vietnam. We said, man, you don't go out the same way every day. You don't set a pattern, or you're going to get ambushed, or you're going to get booby trapped. You got to go different ways. Well, in cities, there's not that many ways you can go. For instance, in Vietnam, we never walked on top of the rice paddies. That's a sure way to get blown up. You don't walk down trails. I mean, there was just a lot of things you had to do. Now, in Iraq, maybe they're trying to do that, I'm sure. But those, and then of course the suicide bombers. We never had that in Vietnam that I'm aware of. And it's hard to crack. If they're willing to strap it on their body and go blow themselves up, then you're not going to, it's going to be tough to ferret out. Now, whether or not you can go through and police all this stuff up. And of course, the borders are wide open, apparently. And that's where all this stuff is apparently getting in there. Can you close the borders? You're talking a lot of troops.
Yeah, they're big borders.
They're big borders. Yeah, it'd be tough. But overall, I think earlier on, I think our intentions were right to go in there, but it hadn't panned out right. And I think some of the mistakes that we just didn't go in there full bore enough and didn't take out the right kind of people. I mean, that's going to be it.
Do you have any more questions?
I've got a few more questions going back to when you were a professor of military science. How did you run your ROTC battalion there?
At Eastern Washington, when I was a PMS, I had good instructors. I had a cadre that was a top-notch group. We instituted some things here again. Everybody's got their little different quirks and different way they're going to do to it. We were a pretty small unit. Of course, by then, most ROTC units had, drawn down pretty small. I forget exactly how many we had there. And by this time, we had females in the program. But one of the first things I did, I said, we're going to get in shape. We're going to do PT. We're going to get in shape. Because I hearken back when I was here at UT. We did that, and we did it hard, and it was beneficial. And if nothing else, it gives you a structure and it gives you something to really work with young cadets. And we also, I let my instructors pretty well have free reign. I said, you guys, you teach your subjects and I'll supervise it and give you support where I can. But it's not going to be done my way. If yours is working, we'll go that way. We had a few scholarship students, not that many, but Eastern Washington University had traditionally been a very strong ROTC program. It had one through the years. It always had a good, strong ROTC program. Good old country boys, a lot of them, from out in that part of the state. So we were able to recruit pretty good on campus and get a pretty good number of people in there. But again, we just tried to make it exciting to them, if you will. Try to make it something they would enjoy coming to. And I felt and found that if you kind of work the kids and really challenge them, they want to be challenged. And that's kind of the approach we took at it. We tried to take them on some, quote, field trips. Got over to Fort Lewis a few times.
But when did they move the advance camp from Fort Benning to Fort Lewis? Do you have a year on that? Yeah,
we ran the advance camp. We were running an advance camp out at Lewis when I was there in 81, 82. Because I ran I was in charge of I had a bunch of guys under me. We ran the compass course and the commo course and oh golly, 2 or 3 things under my umbrella. I had these cadre in there that ran these things. The big thing was the compass course. It was brutal. We had to tweak it a little bit because we kept getting people lost. It was tough terrain. We set it up in. We got to work on that a little bit. But yeah, the early 80s is when I remember we had an advance camp out at Fort Lewis. Now, I don't know if they weren't still conducting one at Benning or not. Are they strictly out at Fort Lewis now?
That's strictly at Fort Lewis now.
So that's everybody goes to Fort Lewis. Well, that's interesting. I don't remember if at that point if we had all of them out there. No, the other thing I had was the slide for life. We had a slide for life.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, well, it's a fun thing to do. And I had a real hard charging captain that ran that thing for me. And he made it pretty tough for me. Did a lot.
Actually, for those who are not in the ROTC world, you might need to explain that.
The slide for life?
Yes.
Well, you went through a series of things. You ended up climbing up
Something like 80 feet or
80 feet
something.
up in the air, walk across a flat, they had it flattened out on the top, and you have to go over some steps, and you go out to this, and it's a balance thing. I mean, it's pretty, kind of scary up there, because you're over water.
Yeah.
If you fall off, it bombs away. But then, and then you climb up to this thing, and I guess they've still got the two handle deals on.
And it's on a rope.
On a rope.
Climb out on the rope, and you just let go.
Let go. You smack. Did they have the Ranger tab out there?
Yes.
Or the ROTC?
Recondo.
That's right. Yeah, Recondo. We couldn't do the Ranger. You'd climb out on a rope and you'd smack this thing and then request permission to drop. You'd drop what? 30 feet maybe? Something like
37 feet, I think.
Oh, okay.
You climb this 80-foot tower and slide down the zip line.
Yeah.
Let go when you get to the bottom.
That was always fun to see how people, and like Justin was saying, you slide down this thing, it's got a wheel type, like a pulley deal you're holding on to. You're zipping down this thing. Well, the key thing is, did they wave a flag at you when to drop? Okay, we try to make sure they didn't just auger all the way in. But a lot of guys, if they didn't keep their feet up, they let their feet down, and when they drop, when they hit the water, they'd slap them forward.
Face plant.
Yeah, there you go. It's terminology. Bring it back some memory. But key thing was to hold your feet up and you kind of hit in the butt first. But if you let those feet down and hit like that, boy, it would smack you down. Guys come out, eyes wide open. And you had to swim out. I forget how deep the water was. It wasn't probably that deep.
Oh, yeah. We had life jackets on when we did it.
I don't remember that with our guys. I don't know if we had life jackets. We probably did. But then you had to make sure that things were pretty safe. So that started in 81, 82 when I was out there. So I didn't realize that. I was thinking they still had some at Benning, but maybe not. But so it's there full time. That's good. So,
were there any cadets that you had that you were particularly proud of that made it like way up in the ranks?
And this may sound, I retired at that point. So I don't know of any of my cadets. I haven't been back out to Eastern to see if any of them have gone on up. And the cadre that I had, I kind of lost touch with them, and they would probably know more than I would if some of the cadets had gone on it. But I really don't have a feel for that. We had some good cadets, and I'm sure made good officers. But I don't know that. Sure don't.
And last question I got is, what would you say your most rewarding the most rewarding thing you did in the Army was?
It's a good question.
It is.
It's a great end of interview.
That is a good question. I guess in a very general term is that, I always try to, you have the mission and the welfare of the men. Those go hand in hand. And if you don't take care of the men, your mission's not going to get accomplished. And that's the way I always try to run my units. I always try to treat people as, treat them like they should be. And then the mission will take care of itself. On an individual basis, now this is one I'm really proud of. I had a kid. At Fort Benning, he was in the scout dog detachment. He was trained to be a scout dog. He came in one day and he said, "Sir, I need to go home." He said, "I thought about going AWOL, but he said, I felt like I could come to you and request that I need to go home." And he said, "I've got a family situation I need to take care of." And I said, "Okay. What, if you don't mind me asking, what is it?" He said, "Well," he said, "I've got a younger brother and sister, and our mother has left me." That's tough. I got that young man. I said, "I'll tell you what I want you to do. You go home and you take care of your young brother and sister. And when you get back, or when you think you can come back, you get in touch with me." And I said, "At that point, we will have you." And I went to the IG and I said, "We will have you a discharge to go take care of your family. I said, to me, that's, I mean, this kid, I mean, he was sincere. I can tell you that. So we do this. About 6 months later, he walks into my office. I'm still at Fort Benning. He's in a suit and tie. He had gotten out of the military. He had gotten in the manager training program. And he was taking care of his kids, his siblings. He said, I want to come back and say thank you. To me, that was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. It's a great story to end. Well,
so I always try to take care of my men, and that one sticks out.
Well, I have to say, I enjoyed when you spoke at Celebrate Freedom and meeting you there, and I enjoyed your first interview. And I have to say, it's been a real pleasure.
Well, it's been fun for me. And like you say, somewhere down the road, somebody reads it and gets something out of it. Maybe.
Well, Justin has been reading your first print. He's getting to know you very well from transcribing the first interview and the second. But I really want to thank you very much for coming back.